The sound of the latch still rings in my ears. It wasn't loud, not the kind of slam that belongs to anger or chaos. It was quieter than that. Final, like a verdict delivered in silence. I stood on the porch with nothing but a half-packed suitcase and the echo of her perfume still hanging in the doorway. Behind that wooden door, my door, was laughter. Faint, muffled, domestic laughter. Her laughter. The evening light was soft and golden, almost kind, but it only made the moment crueler. The house looked peaceful from the outside, the same white walls I'd painted with my own hands years ago, the same flower pots my late wife had chosen, but the peace was a lie. Inside, they had closed me out of my own life, my own story. I remember the way she looked at me before the door closed. Not with rage, not even with satisfaction, but with something worse. Pity. The kind of pity reserved for the old and irrelevant. "It's better this way," she'd said softly, as if exile could be repackaged as mercy. My son hadn't met my eyes. He had just stood there, hands buried in his pockets, pretending not to see the man who had once carried him on his shoulders through storms. And then the latch turned. I didn't move. Couldn't. The neighbor's curtains trembled with the kind of curiosity that only misery can draw. Somewhere down the street, a child was laughing. The ordinary sounds of the world went on, indifferent to the collapse of mine. My fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. It was heavy, not with belongings, but with everything I hadn't said. Every insult I had swallowed for the sake of peace. Every kindness that had gone unacknowledged. I thought about turning back, about knocking again, demanding an explanation. But what would I say? That this was unfair? That they had no right? Fairness had never saved anyone. A single thought cut through the fog like a blade. Remember this moment. The smell of dust in the evening air, the sound of a distant radio, the way humiliation tastes, metallic, thick, unforgettable. If you're listening to this story now, remember one thing. Betrayal doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives quietly, wearing a smile. It says, "It's better this way," and locks the door. If you've ever had someone close the door on you, someone you trusted, you'll understand. And if you haven't, well, stay a while. Listen. What I did next will make you think twice about what revenge really means. So before we go on, don't forget to stay till the end. You'll want to see how far this goes. The sun was setting when I finally moved. My legs felt heavy, uncooperative, as if my body refused to accept what my mind already knew. I walked down the driveway, the same stones I'd laid myself 15 years ago, and every crunch beneath my feet felt like a farewell. The car I'd parked outside was gone. My son's car was there, shining new and proud, sitting where mine used to. Funny, isn't it? The way ownership shifts without ceremony. You give and give until one day even the ground beneath you forgets your name. I stopped by the mailbox. My nameplate was still there, Harold Dean. The paint was chipped, but it was mine. I traced the letters with my thumb and laughed quietly. I wondered how long it would take before she had it replaced. Maybe she'd keep it just long enough to look polite in front of the neighbors. Then one day, a new name would appear, neat and glossy. Hers. That laugh didn't last long. My throat tightened and I looked up at the windows. The curtains moved. Someone was watching. I couldn't tell who. It didn't matter. Let them look. Let them see what they'd done. The old man outside, the relic they'd finally discarded. But inside me, something shifted. A click. Almost as quiet as the door's latch. The same sound, but this time it wasn't an ending. It was a beginning. I walked until my legs burned. There wasn't anywhere to go. No friends I hadn't. Embarrassed myself in front of, no family left who would take sides without guilt. I ended up at a motel a few blocks away. The kind of place that smelled like cigarette smoke and forgotten dreams. The clerk didn't ask questions. Men like me don't need to be asked. He just handed me a key with a sympathetic nod. The room was small, lit by one weak bulb and a flickering TV that played a rerun of a sitcom I used to laugh at. I set the suitcase down on the bed and opened it. Half of what I'd packed didn't make sense. Old shirts, a broken photo frame, my late wife's scarf. I picked it up and inhaled. Faint perfume, faded comfort, and a whisper in my mind. What would she say if she saw this? I sat down, elbows on knees, staring at the peeling wallpaper. The air conditioner hummed softly, indifferent to my collapse. That's when the first wave hit me. Not anger, not yet, but the kind of hollow that eats from the inside out. The realization that you have nowhere to belong. I don't know how. Long I sat there, counting breaths, listening to the slow decay of the night. I thought about my son, the boy who once refused to sleep unless I told him a story, now a man who wouldn't meet my eyes. I thought about her, my daughter-in-law, with her polite smile, her perfect posture, her quiet suggestions that had slowly turned into decisions. She had always been kind, careful, too careful, and then I thought about the papers I had signed 2 months ago. Just for convenience, she'd said. It's better to keep things in the family name. I hadn't questioned it. Because when you love someone, you trust them. Because when you're a father, you assume no one will turn your love into leverage. That was my first mistake. The next morning, I stood at the same motel window watching the traffic crawl past. The sunlight looked colder somehow, like it had already judged me and moved on. I poured the last of the motel coffee into a paper cup and tried to steady my hands. Revenge wasn't on my mind yet, not in the way most people imagine it. It was quieter, a pulse, steady and measured. I didn't want to destroy them. Not yet. I wanted to understand them, to know why. So I started small. I walked back to the neighborhood that evening, pretending I was just passing through. The street looked the same. Children on bikes, sprinklers hissing, someone grilling steaks. Ordinary life. But ordinary life has eyes. It talks. Mrs. Nolan, my old neighbor, spotted me first. "Harold, oh dear, I heard you moved out," she said, tone heavy with curiosity disguised as concern. "Something like that," I replied. She hesitated. "Well, you know how young people are these days. They like their privacy." Privacy. That was the word she chose. Not betrayal, not theft. Privacy. I nodded, smiled, and walked away before she could say more. But I noticed something. Her eyes darted toward the house as she spoke, toward the windows. There was more to this story. There always is. As I stood across the street, hidden by the shadow of an old oak tree, I saw them through the glass. My son, pacing, her, sitting with a cup of tea, looking calm. Maybe too calm. And then she did something I'll never forget. She smiled, not at him, not at anyone, just to herself. A small, satisfied smile. That's when I knew. This wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was a plan, and I wasn't going to be its casualty. I walked back to the motel under a sky bruised with purple clouds. The world was settling into night, but my mind was wide awake. Every word, every look, every sound from the past year replayed in perfect clarity. The accidental suggestions she made about changing ownership. The way she'd softened my son's opinions over time. The way she'd smiled when I said, "Don't worry, I trust you both." I didn't see it then, but I see it now. And if you've ever been betrayed like that, you know the moment when your grief hardens into purpose. When pain stops being a wound and becomes a weapon. That night, I opened my suitcase again, not for comfort, but for inventory. Deeds, receipts, old property tax papers. I spread them on the bed like puzzle pieces. Every line, every signature, every date, mine. 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 And as I looked at them, the air around me seemed to shift. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt alive. Waiting. I leaned back in the chair and whispered to the empty room, "You took my home, but you forgot who built it." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, quiet, restrained, like applause from the gods of irony. I smiled. The rain came that night, a slow, deliberate drizzle that tapped against the motel window like a reminder, every drop saying, "Don't forget what they did." The street outside glistened under the orange glow of a dying streetlight. Cars passed, their tires whispering secrets on wet asphalt. I couldn't sleep. How could I? My mind was a storm of its own. Memories, doubts, possibilities. I sat by the small table near the window, papers spread before me like clues in a crime scene. I had become my own detective, and my crime was naivety. Every signature I had placed in blind faith now stared back at me as a confession. Ownership transfer, joint rights, authorization letter. Each line was a monument to my stupidity and their cunning. I remember her voice when she brought the documents that day. Calm, musical, wrapped in feigned affection. "It's just a technical formality, Dad," she had said, calling me by that word she used like a prop. "You'll still have everything. It's just easier this way." Easier. That word had betrayed me as much as she had. I pressed my thumb against the paper, feeling the roughness of the inked stamp. The scent of cheap motel soap clung to my skin, mixing with the stale air. I whispered her words again under my breath, as if repetition would dull their sting. But each time they cut deeper. I thought of my son's silence, how he had stood by, complicit through inaction. He wasn't a monster, not really. Just a man too weak to stand between his wife's ambition and his father's pride. And weakness, I realized, was its own kind of cruelty. At some point, I turned on the lamp. Its flickering light painted everything gold, the documents, my trembling hands, the reflection in the mirror. For the first time in days, I didn't look broken. I looked awake. The next morning, I went back to the neighborhood again, not as the old man cast out, but as the observer returning to the scene of the crime. I kept my distance, walking slow, blending into the routine of joggers and mailmen. From the corner, I could see my house, their house, still standing tall, smug in its silence. I noticed small details. Her car wasn't in the driveway anymore. The blinds were drawn tighter. A new flower pot by the window, bright red tulips. She had always been fond of appearances. Across the street, I stopped by the convenience store, pretending to buy a bottle of water. The cashier, a young man with sleepy eyes, glanced up. "You used to live in that White House, right?" he asked. I smiled faintly. "Used to." He hesitated. "Heard the lady there's planning to rent it out. Said her father-in-law moved away permanently." The words hit harder than I expected. Permanently. As if I had died. As if they had buried me quietly under paperwork. I thanked him and stepped outside, gripping the bottle until it crumpled in my hand. For a long moment, I just stood there, the sun glaring down, the world oblivious. Then I laughed, low, bitter, but real, because now I understood this wasn't a mistake. This was a rewrite. They hadn't kicked me out. They had erased me. That realization didn't break me. It built me. Back at the motel, I cleared the table and laid everything out again. Paper by paper, receipt by receipt, line by line. I traced the signatures, compared the dates, found patterns they had hoped I'd never see. There were gaps, intentional perhaps. But the more I read, the clearer it became. They had transferred the title under a joint maintenance clause, which meant the property could not be sold, rented, or mortgaged without my approval. The clause was buried deep, written in legal jargon meant to be overlooked. But I found it. I always find what people hide. That night I smiled again, a real smile this time. Because in the ruins of trust I had found leverage. You see, revenge isn't born in rage. Rage is loud, impulsive, stupid. No, true revenge begins in quiet understanding. In realizing you don't need to strike to make someone bleed. You only need to let truth do the cutting. I began to plan. Not the way you plan a fight, but the way you plan a storm. 3 days later, I returned one last time, standing across the street as dusk fell. The air was thick with the smell of rain and fresh paint. My son was in the driveway, fixing something under the hood of his car. He looked tired, or maybe just hollow. I watched him in silence. There was no anger left, only clarity. Then she appeared in the doorway, dressed too neatly for evening, holding a phone to her ear. Her voice carried faintly across the street. I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the tone. Confident, possessive. She was already building her empire on my foundation. I turned away before she could notice me. My reflection stared back from the car window. Older, colder, but alive. I whispered to myself, "You wanted a home. You built a kingdom. Now watch it fall, because I wasn't gone. Not permanently, not yet, and when I came back, it wouldn't be for comfort. It would be for closure." That night, as the city lights blurred beyond the motel window, I finally opened my old phone. Dozens of messages waited, from acquaintances, from distant relatives, from people who only reached out when gossip tasted fresh. I ignored them all except one, a realtor, someone I'd met years ago at a community event. Her message was simple. "Heard you might be interested in listing a property. Still have that place in Fairview?" I stared at it for a long time, then typed 2 words back. "Let's talk." Outside, thunder rolled again, louder this time, closer, and somewhere inside me, a new storm took shape. I met the realtor the next morning at a cafe just a few miles from the house I no longer called home. Her name was Clara Monroe, mid-40s, brisk, with that confident, clipped voice that made even disappointment sound like business. She didn't recognize the tremor in my hands when I shook hers, didn't notice the exhaustion behind my eyes. To her, I was just another seller, a man trying to downsize his life. "So," she began, flipping open her notepad, "you're the sole owner of the Fairview property?" I smiled faintly. "Legally speaking, yes. Emotionally speaking, and that's a longer story." She laughed politely, assuming it was a joke. It wasn't. The cafe smelled of burnt espresso and rain-damp coats. I told her the basics: square footage, number of rooms, location. She nodded along, professional, detached. But when I mentioned the address, her eyebrows lifted. "That house? The white one on the corner with the big windows? I think I know who lives there now." Her words landed like a small, sharp stone. "Lives there now. Present tense, as if I were already a ghost." "Neighbors talk," she continued casually, sipping her coffee. "The young couple's made some changes. Looks beautiful from the outside." I felt my jaw tighten. "Yes," I said. "They've done a wonderful job redecorating what they didn't build." Something in my tone must have caught her attention. She studied me for a beat, then softened her voice. "You know, Mr. Dean, people sometimes hold on to houses longer than they should. Selling might actually be freeing. Another word people love to use when they mean loss." Still, I nodded. "You're right. I think it's time." And with those 4 words, the storm officially began. That night, I lay awake, listening to the rain again. It came like clockwork now, almost as if the sky understood what was brewing beneath it. I imagined her face when she'd hear the news that I was selling the house. The shock, the panic, the quiet fear behind her composure. She thought she'd won. She thought I'd disappear quietly into some rented room and live out the rest of my days as a ghost of generosity. But I wasn't the ghost, she was. She just didn't know it yet. I reached for the old property file again. The faint smell of ink and dust filled the room. Each page was a weapon waiting to be drawn. I highlighted the maintenance clause, the co-ownership line, the stipulation that required my signature for any transaction. Their trap had left one flaw: me. The lamp flickered. The rain softened to a whisper. I could almost hear my late wife's voice in the quiet, calm, patient, a sound I hadn't heard in years. "Don't let anger blind you, Harold," she used to say. "If you want justice, don't fight with your fists. Fight with the truth." And I smiled because this wasn't vengeance anymore. This was arithmetic. A simple balance of what's owed and what's taken. 2 weeks later, Clara called. "I've got a serious buyer," she said, excitement humming in her voice. "He's looking for something exactly like your property. Large corner lot, solid foundation, great resale potential. Would you be open to a private showing? A private showing. The irony almost made me laugh. Yes, I replied. But the family there might be surprised to see me? Well, she said, hesitating, technically, if you're the owner, you're within your rights. I'll handle the paperwork. That night, I stood by the motel window again, staring at my reflection. The same eyes, but sharper now. The same man, but colder. I practiced what I would say, how I would look, how I would stand when the moment came. Not angry, not desperate, just deliberate. When revenge is patient, it looks a lot like dignity. The day of the showing arrived gray and still, the kind of morning that smells like old paper and impending storms. Clara met me at the corner, clipboard in hand, her expression half curiosity, half professionalism. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. The gate creaked when I pushed it open. The sound felt personal. Every step across that driveway felt heavier than the last. The flower pots, the repainted fence, the new welcome mat, all little declarations of conquest. Through the window, I saw movement, her silhouette, hair perfectly tied, moving briskly between rooms. My son appeared behind her, looking smaller somehow, diminished by the quiet dominance she carried. Clara rang the bell. For a moment, there was silence. Then the door opened. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw it. The flicker of fear. "Mr. Dean," she said, her voice soft, calculated. "We weren't expecting you." "I imagine you weren't," I replied. "But then life is full of surprises." She hesitated, glancing at Clara. "We're in the middle of something." "This won't take long," I interrupted. "We're just here to assess the property. I assume you don't mind since it's under my name." Her lips parted, but no words came. My son shifted uncomfortably behind her. The silence stretched, thin and sharp as glass. Clara, ever the professional, broke it with a practiced smile. "We'll be quick." I stepped past them into the house. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and deceit. Every surface gleamed, every picture frame straight. They had scrubbed away every trace of me, except the foundation. That they couldn't touch. I ran my fingers along the wall as I walked through the hall. "Still solid?" I murmured. "I remember when I laid this beam myself. Took 3 days to get it level." She said nothing, but I could feel her anger pulsing beneath that polished composure. When I reached the living room, I paused. On the mantel was a photo of my son and her, smiling, framed in silver. I picked it up, studied it. Then I smiled too, but differently. "Good picture," I said, "but you forgot to keep the one that used to hang right here." Her jaw tightened. "We redecorated, so I see." I turned to Clara. "What do you think of the place? Worth listing?" Clara nodded, already making notes. "Great structure. Beautiful upkeep. Easily marketable." I caught the flash of panic in her eyes, small but unmistakable. I leaned closer to the fireplace, tracing the marble edge. "You know," I said softly, "I used to think this house could hold a lifetime of love. Turns out it only holds ownership documents." And then I smiled, looking right at her. "Luckily, I kept the originals." Her color drained. My son took a step forward, voice trembling. "Dad, what are you doing?" "What I should have done months ago," I said. "I'm selling." The silence that followed was almost holy. For a second, nobody moved. The air itself seemed to stop breathing. The rain had started again outside, tapping faintly against the window panes like an audience holding its breath. My son looked at me, wide-eyed, as if the word selling didn't belong in his father's mouth. His wife was the first to speak. Of course she was. "You can't just—" she began, but the tremor in her voice betrayed her. I cut her off gently. "Can't I? Legally, the house is under my name. The documents you had me sign, those were joint management, not transfer of ownership. I imagine your lawyer explained that part to you?" Her lips parted, but no sound came out. She hadn't read the fine print. She'd been too sure, too smug. And now, realization was crawling up her throat like smoke. Clara glanced between us, the unease of a professional who had walked into a family storm she couldn't step out of. "Perhaps we can discuss the market value?" she offered, her tone a fragile bridge. I nodded slowly. Of course. Please go on. But my eyes stayed on her and my son's wife as Clara began describing prices and location advantages. Her jaw had tightened to stone, her hands clasped in front of her to keep them from shaking. She was still trying to play the part of the calm homeowner, but her silence was loud enough to drown Clara's voice. When she finally spoke, it was a whisper. You wouldn't do that to us. I looked at her for a long time. You already did it to me. Her eyes glistened, not with guilt, but with panic. She turned to my son, searching for support, but he avoided her gaze. Maybe he finally understood, or maybe he simply realized how fragile their little empire had been all along. We moved through the house like actors in a slow play. Clara's heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she noted every detail. Square footage, fixtures, lighting. I followed behind, my hand grazing the walls I'd built with calloused fingers and quiet dreams. Every room carried a ghost. My wife's laughter, my son's first steps, the long, slow years of building something that was supposed to last. And then we reached the kitchen. The smell of her perfume clung to the air. The counters gleamed. It was spotless, too spotless. She had scrubbed the house of me, sterilized it into submission. I looked at the table, remembering Sunday mornings filled with noise and warmth. Now it stood like a museum exhibit, proof that life had once existed here. She followed me in, her tone sharp now. You think selling this house will fix what you feel? You'll lose it too, I smiled faintly. No, I'll let it go. That's different. You're punishing him, she said, pointing toward my son. He doesn't deserve that. He deserves honesty, I replied. You both do. You wanted a home that wasn't yours. You took it. Now you'll learn what it feels like to lose something you didn't build. Her eyes flared. You can't prove— Oh, I don't need to, I said quietly. All I need is a signature, mine. The words hung there between us, heavy, certain, final. When Clara left, the house felt smaller. The silence pressed against the walls. I lingered by the window, watching her car disappear into the gray drizzle. Behind me, they stood together, a picture of unity cracked at the edges. Dad, my son began. I turned to him slowly. Don't call me that now. Not while you still stand on what I built and pretend it's yours. He swallowed hard. She said it was for the best. That it was temporary. That I'd understand? I interrupted. That I'd stay quiet? That I'd be too old, too tired to fight? He didn't answer. The truth hung in the silence. I'm not angry anymore, I said. Anger's a waste of time. I'm awake. And when a man wakes up after being blindfolded, he doesn't go back to sleep just because someone says sorry. He nodded weakly, unable to meet my eyes. I almost pitied him. Almost. His wife tried to speak again, but I raised a hand. You'll have the chance to buy it back, I said. If you can afford it. The color drained from her face. Until then, I continued, consider this house a ticking clock. Every day it stands, it counts down to the moment you remember who gave you everything you thought you could steal. And with that, I turned toward the door. The rain had turned into a steady downpour by the time I stepped outside. The air was heavy and alive, carrying the scent of wet earth and thunder. My shoes splashed through puddles as I walked down the driveway, past the mailbox that still bore my name, Harold Dean. The letters looked almost new again under the rain. I smiled. As I reached the gate, I heard the door open behind me. My son's voice strained and trembling. Dad, please. Don't do this! I didn't look back. You already did. And then I walked away, slowly, deliberately, into the storm that felt more like home than the house ever would again. Because storms, at least, are honest. That night, back in the motel, I spread the papers out one last time. Water from my coat dripped onto the pages, smudging the ink slightly, like the past finally washing itself clean. I signed where I needed to. Clara would handle the rest. I wasn't selling for money. I was selling for silence, for the final sound of a door closing that wasn't against me. But for me, I leaned back, the sound of rain thrumming on the roof, and whispered into the dim light, You locked me out once. Let's see how it feels when the world locks you out in return. The storm outside roared louder, almost answering, and I smiled, not with victory, not with relief, but with something far more dangerous: peace. Morning came pale and thin, leaking through the blinds of the motel like it was too timid to enter. The rain had finally stopped, but the world outside looked rinsed raw, clean, empty, unburdened. I dressed in silence, put on the same old jacket that still smelled faintly of turpentine and years of work, and packed the suitcase again. This time it wasn't heavy. The weight that had kept me anchored to that house had gone somewhere else, into ink, into signatures, into truth. Clara called just before I stepped out. Her voice was brisk but gentle. "It's done," she said. "The buyer's confirmed. Offer accepted. They'll handle inspection next week." I nodded to no one. "Good," I said. "Let them walk through it. Let them see how well it was built." There was a pause. "You sound calm." "I am," I said, for the first time in a long time. After we hung up, I stood for a moment in the quiet. Then I left the room key on the table and stepped outside into a morning that smelled of wet asphalt and new beginnings. I walked to the house one last time. Not to gloat, not to confront, just to witness. The street was empty. The air felt heavy with the kind of silence that comes before understanding. When I turned the corner, there it was. My house, their house, nobody's house. A realtor's sign staked neatly into the lawn. For sale. The letters gleamed white in the weak light. She was standing in the driveway. No makeup this time, hair pulled back, a mug clutched tight in her hands. She didn't see me right away. I almost turned back, but then she looked up and froze. Our eyes met across the distance like two mirrors facing each other, each reflecting a truth neither wanted to admit. "You went through with it," she said finally. Her voice was small. "I told you I would." "You'll ruin him," she said, meaning my son. I shook my head. "No, I'll remind him." She took a few steps closer, the gravel crunching under her slippers. "You think this makes you right? You think you've won?" "I didn't do it to win," I said softly. "I did it to end," she laughed, brittle and hollow. "You could have just forgiven us," I smiled faintly. "You mistake forgiveness for forgetfulness. I can forgive, I just don't have to forget." Her lips trembled, but she didn't speak again. The silence between us was thick with all the things that would never be said, apologies that would never come, justifications that no longer mattered. Then I turned toward the sidewalk, where the wind was picking up again. "Take care of him," I said. "He'll need someone who can stand when the foundation shakes." She called after me, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens now?" I didn't look back. Now the house tells the story. A week later, I met the buyer at the agent's office. A quiet man in his 40s, polite, with ink stains on his fingers and eyes that looked like he'd read too many sad novels. He signed the final papers with reverence, as if he understood what the place meant, what it had cost to let go of. "Beautiful home," he said. "Must have been hard to part with it." I smiled, watching the pen move across the contract. "Some things you have to lose before you understand what they were worth." He nodded, not prying further. When it was done, Clara slid the folder across the desk toward me. "That's it," she said. "You're officially free of Fairview." Free. The word landed different this time. Not as loss. As release. I signed the last page and pushed it back to her. "Freedom always comes with a receipt," I said. That evening, I went to the park near the neighborhood. The air smelled of pine and faint smoke from distant chimneys. I sat on a bench and watched the sun bleed gold over the rooftops. Somewhere beyond those streets, my old house stood quietly, waiting for strangers to make it theirs. And for the first time, I didn't feel the sting of that thought. I felt distance, perspective. You see, revenge isn't about destroying others. It's about rebuilding the parts of yourself they tried to break. And sometimes that means letting them watch as you walk away stronger than before. I thought about my son, how small he had looked standing in that doorway. Maybe one day he'd understand. Maybe he wouldn't. But I'd made peace with both outcomes. As the sun sank lower, I whispered to the fading light, "You don't get to keep what you built on lies. Not forever. Then I stood, hands in my pockets, the cool wind cutting through the last of the heat. The streetlights blinked on one by one, glowing like quiet witnesses. And as I walked home, not to a house, but to a life finally mine again, I realized the truth. Sometimes the best revenge is simply surviving long enough to become someone they can't hurt anymore. The house had always been loud. Even in silence, it hummed, the rhythm of footsteps, doors closing, laughter spilling through the kitchen. It was the sound of belonging. But when I came back weeks later, not as an owner but as a passerby, it was dead quiet. The lawn was cut too short. The windows gleamed too perfectly. It looked like a replica of the home I built. Same structure, no heartbeat. The new owners hadn't moved in yet, but the emptiness had. You could feel it, like a ghost that had been waiting for everyone to leave before taking its place. I parked across the street, the engine still running, rain misting the windshield. And as I stared at that house, my house, I realized it wasn't grief I felt anymore. It was curiosity. What happens to a home when it loses the person who built it? Does it stay loyal, or does it start forgetting too? I lit a cigarette I didn't plan to finish. The smoke curled in slow spirals, catching the faint glow of the streetlights. I thought of my son. Had he already left this neighborhood for good? Was he still looking for someone to blame? I used to know his patterns. When he'd come home, when he'd lie. I knew the subtle shift in his voice when guilt crept in. Now there was nothing left to read. A car slowed beside me, black sedan, tinted windows. It stopped for just a second before continuing on. Probably nothing. But in that moment, it hit me. Trust had left my bloodstream completely. That's what betrayal does. It doesn't just change your relationships, it rewires your instincts. I exhaled smoke through my nose, the taste of burnt paper and memory filling my mouth. "You did this," I murmured to the dark glass across the street. "You wanted me gone. Now you got what you wanted." And yet, even saying it out loud, it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like an empty stage after the curtain falls, the kind of silence that hints the story isn't over. When I drove back to the motel, the clerk at the front desk looked up from her newspaper and gave me a nod. She was a small woman with wiry gray hair, always wearing the same maroon sweater. We'd developed a strange sort of routine, her asking if I wanted my coffee black, me pretending I wasn't lonely. She said, "You've been quieter lately." I smiled thinly. "I've been listening." "To what?" "To the part of me that stopped apologizing." She chuckled softly and handed me my mail. Just bills, mostly. But there was one envelope that stopped me cold. Plain white, no return address. My name handwritten on the front. I didn't open it there. I waited until I was upstairs, door locked, the hum of the neon sign outside flickering red across the room. My fingers shook slightly as I tore it open. Inside, a single sheet of paper. "You were right. But it's not over. No signature. Just those words." I read them again, slower this time. The handwriting wasn't my son's. It wasn't hers either. Too steady. Too deliberate. I leaned back on the bed, the letter dangling loosely between my fingers. The rain outside picked up again, tapping against the window like a metronome counting down to something. If they wanted me to be afraid, they were too late. I wasn't the man who begged to stay. I was the man who learned what silence could do when you used it right. The next day, Clara called again. Her tone was hesitant. "Mr. Dean, I thought you should know. There's been some pushback on the sale." I straightened. "What kind of pushback?" "The wife. Your daughter-in-law. She's contesting some of the paperwork, claims she was misled about the original ownership. Of course she was. She'd finally realized the walls were closing in." "She can't undo it," I said calmly. "No," Clara admitted. "But she can delay it. Let her," I said. "Delays only expose the desperate." There was a pause. "You sound prepared," I almost smiled. "I've been preparing my whole life. I just didn't know what for." That night I went for a walk. The air was cold enough to sting, the kind of cold that keeps your thoughts sharp. Streetlights glowed against wet pavement, reflecting 100 fractured versions of myself in the puddles. I stopped outside a small grocery store, the same kind I used to take my son to when he was young. He'd always beg for candy at the counter, and I'd always give in. Small bribes for a quiet ride home. Funny how we mistake indulgence for love. I bought a pack of gum I didn't want just to hear a human voice. The cashier, a teenage boy with acne and sleepy eyes, scanned it and said, "You look like you've had a long day, sir." I nodded. "You could say that. Work?" "Something like it." He gave me my change with a sympathetic grin. "My dad says the best way to handle stress is to talk it out." "Does he?" I asked. "And does it work?" The boy shrugged. "Depends who you're talking to." I walked back to the motel chewing the gum, the taste sharp and artificial. My thoughts kept circling the letter. Those 5 words, "You were right." But it's not over. It could have been a warning. Or it could have been an invitation. Either way, it meant one thing. The story had found me again. I sat by the window and looked out at the empty parking lot, the street lamp humming overhead. Somewhere out there, someone still thought they could play me. But the difference now was simple. I had nothing left to lose, and a man with nothing to lose doesn't react. He observes, he waits, he plans. The letter lay open on the table beside me, its words faintly illuminated by the flickering motel sign. I read it one last time before turning off the light, and in the dark, I whispered to whoever was listening, "If it's not over, then neither am I." The following morning began with a knock. 3 firm raps that cut straight through the motel's cheap walls and the thin blanket of sleep I'd managed. For a moment, I thought it was housekeeping. But when I opened the door, 2 men stood in the hallway. Suits, polished shoes, and the faint smell of cologne that clung like authority. "Mr. Dean?" the taller one asked. His tone was polite, but his stance was military. "Yes." He flashed a badge. "Detective Holloway. This is my partner Ruiz. Mind if we come in?" I stepped aside. The room suddenly felt smaller with them inside. Ruiz scanned the space, the papers, the open suitcase. The coffee gone cold, as if mapping out my life with quiet efficiency. Holloway adjusted his tie and said, "We're looking into a complaint filed about the Fairview property. There's mention of forged documents and harassment." I couldn't help the small laugh that slipped out. "She moves fast." "Excuse me?" "Nothing," I said. "You're talking about my daughter-in-law." Holloway gave a faint nod. "Yes, ma'am mentioned you've been persistent." "Persistent," I repeated, tasting the word. "Is that what they call it now when a man refuses to vanish?" He ignored the jab. "We're just following up, sir." "Wanted to get your side." "My side," I said slowly, "is the only one that's true." He studied me for a long moment. That look cops give when they're trying to decide whether you're broken or just dangerous. "Care to elaborate?" I gestured toward the stack of documents on the desk. "All there. The deed, the signatures, the ownership trail. I built that house with my own hands. Paid every tax, every mortgage. The only thing I didn't sign away was my spine." Ruiz glanced through a few papers, nodding slightly. "Looks legitimate." Holloway sighed, disappointed maybe. "All right, Mr. Dean, we'll keep this on record. Just try not to escalate anything. It's a civil matter. Let the courts handle it." "The courts will," I said evenly, "but so will time." They exchanged a look, the kind that says this old man's been through hell, but he's still dangerous enough to watch. Then they thanked me and left. When the door clicked shut, I exhaled. The air felt heavy again, like the room was holding its breath. She'd tried to turn the story against me, rewrite it before the ink had dried, but she didn't understand. I had already accepted the role of the villain, and that gave me power. Later that day, Clara called again. Her voice carried that mix of empathy and caution. "You didn't tell me there was a police report." "There isn't," I said. "Just noise. She's trying to shake the walls. Well, she's rattling a few." Clara hesitated. "But the buyer hasn't backed out. In fact, he seems intrigued. He asked me if the house had a story behind it." I laughed softly. "Tell him it has a ghost. The kind that doesn't haunt, just watches. I'll leave that part out." Her chuckle eased the tension for a heartbeat. "You're a strange man, Mr. Dean." "I wasn't," I said. "I was made. That evening I drove again." The city lights blurred into lines through the rain-slicked windshield. I wasn't headed anywhere specific, just moving. The way grief moves when it has nowhere to settle. When I passed by Fairview one last time, I saw it, her car in the driveway, engine running, headlights cutting through the mist. She was alone inside, staring at something on the passenger seat. For a moment, I parked across the street again, hidden behind the shadow of a tree. I shouldn't have stayed, but I did. Watching her felt like watching a storm try to apologize to the sky. She reached for her phone, dialed, waited. Then her shoulders slumped. No answer. Probably my son. And in that quiet moment, I almost pitied her. Almost. But pity is just love dressed in regret, and I had no use for either. I drove away before she saw me. The rain followed, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the car roof like a pulse. Halfway to the motel, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it ring once, twice, then answered. A voice, low, calm, familiar. "You were right," it said. The same words from the letter. I didn't breathe. "Who is this?" Silence. Then, "She's unraveling. Be ready." The line went dead. I stared at the phone, heart thudding once, twice, then slowing to a steady rhythm. Someone was watching this unfold besides me. Someone close enough to know. And for the first time since the day she locked me out, I wasn't alone in the shadows. That night, I didn't sleep. I spread the papers again, tracing each signature like a map of betrayal and justice intertwined. My reflection in the window looked back at me. Older, sharper, harder. The motel light flickered, painting the room in pulses of red and shadow. Maybe it was paranoia. Maybe it was Providence. But I could feel it. The story shifting again, the ground moving beneath us all, and I whispered to the rain outside. "You think this house is the prize." But it was never about the house. Because what I wanted wasn't property. It was clarity. It was truth. And it was coming. One knock, one confession, one reckoning at a time. I didn't wait long for the reckoning. It came the next afternoon, carried not by thunder or police badges this time, but by a quiet knock, softer than before, almost hesitant. I opened the door to find my son. He looked smaller than I remembered. His shirt was wrinkled, collar damp from rain, hair unkempt. The same eyes that once gleamed with youth now looked like they'd been hollowed out from the inside. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, he said, "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. He moved like a man stepping into confession, slow, uncertain, already aware that forgiveness might not be waiting on the other end. He sat down at the small motel table, eyes tracing the piles of papers and the half-drunk coffee on the counter. "I didn't know it would go this far," he said quietly. I folded my arms. "You mean you didn't think I would fight back?" He winced but didn't argue. "She told me it was temporary, that you'd agreed to transfer the house so she could handle the finances better." I stared at him for a long time. "And you believed her?" He nodded, ashamed. "I thought she was helping. She's good with numbers. You never like dealing with that stuff." "She's good with manipulation," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "You handed her the knife and then pretended not to notice when she used it." He buried his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "No one ever means it," I said softly. "That's the problem. Betrayal doesn't need intent. Just silence." He looked up, eyes red. "Dad, please. Selling the house, it'll ruin us. We have nowhere to go." "You had somewhere once," I said, "before you let her lock me out." His lips parted, then closed again. There was nothing left to defend. He leaned back, running his hand through his hair. "She's scared now. Keeps saying someone's following her. Says she sees people parked outside watching." I froze. "Has she told the police?" "She's too proud," he said. "Thinks it'll make her look weak." I almost laughed. That kind of bitter sound that tastes like memory. Weakness isn't what she fears. Exposure is. He didn't respond, just stared at the floor, the same way he used to when he was a child and got caught lying about something small, a broken window, a stolen dollar. He hadn't changed, not really. Only the stakes had. Finally, he whispered, "You won't stop, will you?" "No," I said. "Not until truth stops pretending it needs permission." He nodded slowly, defeated. "Then I'll try to fix it somehow." "You can't fix what doesn't want to be repaired," I said. "But you can stop standing between the hammer and the nail." He blinked at me, not understanding. Then I stood and walked to the window. Rain had started again, thin, hesitant drops tracing down the glass like sweat. "Go home," I said. "If you still call it that." He hesitated at the door. "What if I leave her?" I turned to face him. "Then maybe you'll remember who you were before she decided who you should be." He nodded once, eyes wet, then left without another word. The sound of the door closing felt final. Not cruel this time, but necessary. That night I drove again, not to the house, not to the cafe, but somewhere quieter. The outskirts of town, where the city lights faded and the fields began. The air smelled like rain and rust, the way it does near old fences and forgotten barns. I parked the car, turned off the engine, and sat in the dark. I wasn't sure why I came. Maybe I wanted to see what stillness felt like again. Maybe I was chasing ghosts. In the distance, lightning flickered behind a bank of clouds, silent but alive. And in that light, I remembered something my wife once said when we first built that house. "Don't ever let our home become our punishment." At the time, I laughed. Thought she meant the walls, the roof, the routine, but now I understood. It wasn't the house that punished me. It was what I let it represent. I had tied my worth to its bricks, my love to its walls, my legacy to its address, and when they took it, they thought they'd taken me. But all they'd done was free me from it. On the way back to the motel, I saw a car trailing in my rearview mirror, headlights dim, keeping distance. It followed me for 3 turns before disappearing. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it wasn't. When I reached the motel, I checked the lot. Empty. Just rainwater reflecting the neon vacancy sign like a wound. Upstairs, I poured myself a drink from the small bottle I'd been saving. Not for celebration, but acknowledgement. The burn in my throat reminded me I was still here, still choosing, still unfinished. Then I pulled the letter back out, the one that said, "You were right." But it's not over. The edges were curled now, stained with rain and fingerprints. I traced the letters again, slowly. "You were right," I whispered. "It's not over." I folded it carefully and slid it back into the drawer, because the truth was, I didn't want it to be. Not yet. Not until the silence I'd carried for years became their echo. Not until the house they stole became the story they couldn't escape. And not until every lie they built on my back collapsed under the weight of their own fear outside. Thunder rolled again. Inside, I smiled. Not with triumph this time, but with certainty. The reckoning had begun, and it was going to be quiet. So quiet. They'd hear it only when it was too late. When I woke the next morning, I knew something had shifted. The motel light felt different. Dimmer, colder, like the day was holding its breath. My body ached from sleeplessness, but my mind was wired, alert. I wasn't done yet. Not even close. There's a kind of silence that doesn't soothe. It listens. That was the silence I felt as I unlocked my car and drove back to Fairview. Not to confront anyone. Not to reclaim the house. Just to see it again with eyes no longer clouded by loss. The street was quiet. The sky was the color of wet steel. The house stood where it always had, but now it felt exposed. I parked across the road, engine idling, watching as if it might flinch under my gaze. A "for sale" pending sign still stood in the yard. Someone had tried to remove the smaller nameplate beneath it, the one with Clara's agency logo, but it hung crooked, half-torn. A metaphor, I thought. The kind liars don't realize they're living in. I stepped out of the car, the wet gravel crunching underfoot, and crossed the street. My hand brushed the gate, still the same cold iron still squeaking in protest. The air smelled faintly of bleach and wet paint. They'd tried to erase me, but ghosts don't wash off that easily. The front porch creaked under my weight. Through the window, I saw boxes stacked against the wall, half packed, half forgotten. My son's handwriting on a few of them. Words like kitchen and linens written in black marker, too quickly, too sloppily. A movement caught my eye, the faint twitch of a curtain upstairs. Someone was home. I didn't knock. I didn't need to. I wasn't ready to be seen, not yet. Instead, I walked around the back to where the garden used to be. The flowers were gone, the soil flat and colorless. The old oak I'd planted with my wife stood taller now, roots deep and wide, its bark darkened by rain. I touched it, rough, cold, real. A reminder that something I built still stood strong. That's when I saw it. The back door slightly ajar. Not open, not locked, just waiting. Inside, the air was still. Not abandoned, lived in but afraid to breathe. The faint hum of a refrigerator echoed from the kitchen. The scent of disinfectant mingled with something else. Perfume. Hers. Still sweet. Still smug. Every corner whispered memory. The chair I once sat in. The table where we laughed. The hall where voices used to echo. I walked like a man moving through his own obituary. When I reached the living room, I stopped. The rug, that old Persian one I'd bought decades ago from a roadside shop on our honeymoon, was still there. But it was folded at the edge, just slightly, as if someone had lifted it and forgotten to fix it back. I knelt down. The wood beneath was scratched. At first I thought it was nothing. Just wear. But then I saw the faint corner of paper caught between two floorboards. My pulse quickened. I lifted the rug completely, careful not to disturb the dust too much. There it was, a folded note, browned at the edges, its ink smudged from time or haste. I opened it and read words that froze me. He knows. Stop meeting in the house. Use the phone only on weekends. Destroy the drafts. No signature. No date. Just that message, written in hurried, nervous strokes. I sat back, staring at it. My breath came shallow. Every sound in the house seemed louder. The ticking clock, the faint wind outside, my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd plotted it here. In these rooms. On this floor. In my home. I stood there for a long while, the letter trembling in my hand. Then the smallest sound broke the silence. Footsteps above. Someone was upstairs. Slow. Deliberate. I froze. For a second I thought it was my imagination. But then the steps came again, wood creaking under careful weight. I folded the note quickly, slid it into my coat pocket, and stepped back toward the doorway. The old stairs loomed ahead, every step a trap for sound. I debated leaving, slipping back out through the kitchen, pretending this never happened. But I didn't, because whoever was up there had something to do with this letter. I could feel it. I started up, slow and silent. My fingers brushed the banister, tracing the same path I once followed when my son was a boy afraid of the dark. At the top, the hallway stretched before me, pale light spilling from the master bedroom door, half open. I reached it, paused, and looked inside. Empty, except for one thing, the phone, sitting on the dresser, its red message light blinking. I crossed the room, pressed play. A voice crackled through the speaker. Hers. He came by again. I think he knows. You said it was handled, but it's not. Call me back when it's safe. Click. My throat tightened. Handled. Safe. This wasn't paranoia anymore. It was proof. And for the first time since that airport, I didn't feel lost. I felt certain. I left quietly, closing the door behind me. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt soaked in aftermath. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and unfolded the letter again. Every curve of ink was now a road map, one that led not to grief, but to names, to connections, to whoever had thought they could bury me. I knew what I had to do. The story wasn't about losing a house anymore. It was about uncovering the one truth that terrified them most. I was still here, alive, thinking, watching. I drove until sunset painted the sky in bruised gold and gray. Then I pulled over at an overlook, The city spread beneath me like a lie too big to hide. The note lay on the dashboard, weighted by the lighter I hadn't used in weeks. I considered burning it, ending it right there, but instead, I took out my notebook. The same one where I'd been tracking every call, every conversation, every strange car that lingered too long, and began to write names, dates, times, words. The letter was a thread, and I was going to follow it until it led me to the hand that tied the knot. And when I found them, I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't strike. I'd do what I did best. I'd wait. Because revenge, when done right, doesn't feel like fire. It feels like truth finally taking its breath back. The wind picked up again, rattling the car door. The street lights below flickered one by one. I closed the notebook, leaned back, and whispered to the night. You tried to bury me in my own home. Now watch what grows out of the soil. The storm had passed. But the reckoning had only just begun. The day I decided to confront them didn't feel special. It wasn't storming. The world didn't tremble. It was just still, too still. The kind of calm that comes before a shift you can't undo. The note from beneath the rug sat folded inside my coat pocket, its edges worn soft by my fingers. Every time I touched it, I remembered the meetings, the phone calls, the whispered handled and safe. It was all I needed. Not evidence for a courtroom, evidence for me. Proof that I wasn't crazy. That betrayal had been planned, not stumbled into. I arrived at the house just after sunset. The lights were on. A warm domestic glow spilled from the windows, the kind of light that lies. Their car was in the driveway. Both of them home. I sat in my car for a minute, staring through the windshield. My breath fogged the glass, each exhale slow and deliberate. My pulse steady. I had no plan beyond truth. No script beyond the words that had been building for months. Finally, I stepped out. The air was cool, the smell of damp earth thick. Gravel crunched beneath my shoes as I walked to the front door. And for the first time since the day they shut it on me, I knocked. The door opened slowly. She stood there, my daughter-in-law, hair pulled back, wearing a sweater that looked too expensive for the home she'd stolen. Her expression flickered between annoyance and fear. "You shouldn't be here," she said flatly. "I lived here before you did," I replied. "I built these walls. I paid for the locks you turned against me." Her jaw tightened. "This isn't your home anymore." That's what liars tell themselves when they start believing their own stories. Behind her, I heard footsteps. My son's. He appeared in the hallway, hesitant. His eyes darted between us, like a man caught between past and present. "Dad," he said quietly, "don't do this here." "Where then?" I asked. "Tell me where truth is allowed to live in this family, and I'll take it there." No one answered. So I stepped inside. The air was heavy, thick with tension and the faint scent of lemon polish. Everything looked too clean, too curated, like they'd scrubbed the memory of me off every surface. I stopped in the middle of the living room, my eyes scanning the space, the rug, the table, the photographs still lined along the mantel. There we were. Smiles, laughter, family. The illusion of unity. I walked closer and lifted one frame. Me holding my grandson, back when they still needed me for the picture. "Funny," I said, "how the frame never changes. Only the faces inside it do." "Dad, please," my son murmured. "You're angry, I get it. But this isn't helping." I turned slowly. "No, what isn't helping is pretending this was an accident. Pretending you didn't know." He looked down, shame flickering across his features like a shadow caught in headlights. She said, "I know what she said," I interrupted, "and I know what she hid." I reached into my coat and pulled out the folded note. "I set it on the table between us like a weapon made of paper. She said you handled it. She said it was safe. Tell me, which part of that is temporary ownership transfer?" Her face drained of color. The faint tremor in her hands betrayed her before her words did. "Where did you get that?" I smiled faintly. "From the home you tried to erase me from." For a long moment, no one spoke. The ticking clock on the wall became deafening. My son stared at the note, then at her, realization slowly dawning. What is that? What does it mean? It's nothing, she said quickly. Old paperwork, maybe? Stop, I said, my voice low but sharp enough to cut through her excuse. Don't reduce your betrayal to paperwork. You planned this. You coordinated it. You thought I wouldn't notice because I trusted you. Her eyes met mine, defiant, scared, cornered. You were never supposed to notice. You were supposed to retire, let go, live quietly. But you couldn't. You had to control everything, even him. She gestured toward my son, her voice trembling now. You never let him grow. You never trusted him with anything, and so you taught him to steal instead? Her breath caught. No, yes, I said. You taught him that betrayal was easier than conversation. That silence was more profitable than loyalty. You turned family into leverage. My son stepped forward, voice breaking. Stop it, both of you! The silence that followed was suffocating. Then something shifted in her. The mask cracked. You think you're the only one who's been wronged? She said bitterly. You built your kingdom on guilt and favors. You made everyone owe you. We just stopped playing your game. I stared at her, something cold settling in my chest. No, you didn't stop the game. You changed the rules. You thought removing me from the board would make you king. I looked at my son, eyes burning. But all it did was show you how fragile your crown really is. He said nothing. Just stood there, pale, trembling, trapped between two truths. I took a step closer, voice lowering. You both wanted me gone, fine, but you'll live with what that cost. Every time you walk through this house, every time you sit where I used to sit, you'll feel it, the weight of what you took. Her lip trembled, but she didn't respond. I turned then, not in defeat, but in completion. At the doorway, I paused. You thought this was about revenge, I said softly. It isn't. Then what is it? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Remembrance, I said. I came to remind you what truth looks like when it finally stops begging to be heard. I opened the door. The night air rushed in, cool, sharp, clean. And before I left, I looked back one last time at the house, at the two people standing frozen inside it. This house may have your name on the deed, I said, but it'll always have my story in its walls. Then I stepped into the night and closed the door behind me, not softly, not violently, just final. Outside, the street was empty. The rain had stopped, but the air still shimmered with electricity, the kind left behind after lightning has struck. As I walked back to my car, I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not peace, just space, the kind you make when you finally stop carrying what isn't yours anymore. The confrontation hadn't ended the story. It had just rewritten who held the pen. I started the engine, headlights slicing through the darkness, and for the first time in months, I didn't look back at the house, because I didn't need to. It would remember me long after they tried to forget. The next morning arrived like a whisper, gray light sliding between the blinds of the motel room. Soft and cold. My head ached, but not from exhaustion. It was the ache that comes after release, the kind that tells you the storm inside has finally run its course. Even if the world outside hasn't changed, I sat up slowly, watching dust float in the light, tiny ghosts suspended in air. For the first time in months, I didn't feel hunted. The confrontation had drained something out of me. The poison, maybe. Or the illusion that I could still fix what was broken. I made coffee, black and bitter. The motel's ancient machine sputtered like an old friend clearing its throat before telling the truth. I poured it into a paper cup and stared at my reflection in the dark surface. The man looking back wasn't the one who'd been locked out of his home. He wasn't the one begging to be understood. He was quieter now, stripped down to something elemental. Not father. Not victim. Just man. And that, somehow, felt enough. Around noon, my phone buzzed. A message from Clara. The sales finalized. They signed the release this morning. Transfer cleared. Funds pending. I read it twice. Then a third time, as if disbelief might slow the meaning. It was done. The house was gone. The walls that had once sheltered my laughter, my heartbreak, my family, now belonged to strangers. And yet, instead of pain, I felt something strange. lighter. I picked up my coat, slid the note, the one from beneath the rug, into my pocket one last time, and stepped outside. The sky was washed pale blue, clouds scattered thin as breath. A clean kind of cold hung in the air, the kind that makes you remember you're alive. I drove without music, without purpose, just the hum of the tires against the road. My hands on the wheel were steady. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of distance. When I passed Fairview for the last time, I didn't stop. I only slowed down long enough to see the sold sign standing crooked in the yard. Through the window, I could see shapes moving inside, workers probably. Painting over the old walls, covering the cracks, filling the memories with primer. They'd paint over everything. But they'd never erase it, because houses don't forget the people who hurt in them. They just keep the secrets quiet. I parked by the hill overlooking the town, the same one I'd sat on weeks before. When vengeance was still a language, I hadn't yet learned how to stop speaking. Below, life went on. Cars, people, noise. The world didn't care who lost or who was right, and maybe that was the lesson. I pulled the note out again, let the wind catch its edge. The ink had bled a little from the rain that day, but the words were still legible. He knows. Stop meeting in the house. Use the phone only on weekends. Destroy the drafts. I smiled faintly. You forgot one thing, I murmured. The truth doesn't burn as easily as paper. I held it up to the light, then let go. The wind took it. It fluttered once, twice, then vanished into the gray horizon, where things that mattered too much finally learn how to disappear. That evening, Clara called again. Her voice was bright. It's official, Mr. Dean. Everything cleared beautifully. You'll receive confirmation by morning. Thank you, I said softly. You sound different, she said. I am, I replied. I stopped trying to win. She hesitated. Does that mean you've forgiven them? I thought about that for a long moment, staring at the fading sky outside my window. No, I said. Forgiveness implies they still matter. She didn't reply right away. Then, gently, you know, not many people get to walk away that calm after what you've been through. Calm isn't peace, I said. It's what's left when peace doesn't show up. She sighed. You're something else, Mr. Dean. Not something else, I said quietly. Just someone who finally stopped mistaking loyalty for love. That night, I returned to the motel and began packing. There wasn't much. A few shirts, the notebook full of my scribbles, the half-empty bottle of whiskey I'd used for courage and regret in equal measure. Before leaving, I stood by the window one last time, looking out at the flickering neon sign. The same one that had kept me company through nights of rage, loss, and calculation. It buzzed softly, red and tired. Thank you, I whispered. And maybe I meant it. I didn't go far. Just down the road to a small town that didn't know my name. I rented a room above a cafe that smelled of cinnamon and fresh bread. The owner, a woman in her 50s, greeted me with the kind of kindness that doesn't ask questions. You staying long? She asked. Just until I stop remembering, I said. She smiled. That could take a while. I hope it does. Days turned to weeks. I started walking in the mornings through streets that didn't carry my history. I sat in cafes, watching people argue, laugh, fall in love. I listened to their small dramas, parking tickets, late shifts, forgotten anniversaries, and envied the simplicity of pain that didn't echo. One morning, a small boy tripped outside the cafe and dropped his toy car. I picked it up and handed it to him. His mother smiled gratefully, said, You remind me of my father. He used to build little wooden cars for my son. For the first time in a long time, I smiled without pretending. Then he must have been patient. He was, she said, and stubborn. Good combination, I replied. As they walked away, I caught myself thinking, maybe I could build something again. Not a house, not a legacy, just something small, something quiet. Maybe that's what survival really is. One evening, as the sun sank low behind the hills, I sat on the porch of the cafe, notebook in hand. I opened to the last page, the one after all the chaos, all the pain, all the lists and plans. And I wrote, there are two kinds of people in the world, those who destroy you and those who teach you how to rebuild yourself afterward. Sometimes they're the same. I closed the notebook and let it rest on the table beside my coffee. The air smelled like rain again. Somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. I thought of the house, not with anger this time, but with a kind of distant affection, like a scar you've stopped tracing but still remember how it happened. They could keep the walls. They could live among their ghosts. But the story, my story, would always belong to me. As night fell, I whispered to the quiet street, "You can take a man's home, but you can't take what made it his." The wind carried the words somewhere unseen, and for the first time I didn't need them to come back.